Hey there, you awesome people. I hope your day has been nothing short of fantastic. Welcome back to a brand new episode of What If Deku Had Green Lightning. Don't forget to shower some appreciation onto the incredible author responsible for this fanfiction. The link is conveniently waiting for you in the description box down below. If you're totally vibing with this what if scenario, drop me a comment and let your thoughts be known. And while you're at it, don't miss out on other mind-blowing what ifs on this channel. Alright, without further ado, let's dive straight into this video. Bakugo was not someone Class 1 would describe as a particularly loving person, or kind, or caring. Yet there used to be one exception to that, notably Izuku, who he'd had quite a good relationship with. And over the time he'd been at UA, Bakugo had simmered down somewhat, and had developed beyond a personality that screamed anger. He had become someone who, whilst quick to anger, was pragmatic, decisive, and for those close to him he was quite a good leader. His combat prowess was decidedly without question, and he along with Yoirozu, Izuku, Iida and Todoroki, were undeniably on track to become the strongest students of UA, if not of future top heroes. Sure, they all had their issues, but they were definitely well on track. One of the issues for Bakugo was, unsurprisingly, to be able to turn it down a little. Yoirozu needed to learn how to turn it up. It was kind of unsurprisingly how well they got along, especially after the first combat training. Amongst the first-year students, they were considered a power couple. And yet behind closed doors and to 1A, they were so much more than this. It was evident the couple had an incredibly strong bond, and cared little for the other's strength. Despite this, they pushed the other to go beyond, to try harder, and to do better. Both trained more, together and apart. Bakugo helped Momo with strength, and Bakugo would readily admit that Momo, having had put on somewhat more muscle, was kinda hot, whilst Momo helped Bakugo with his combat strategy and finer points of his technique, putting his fighting form closer to an art form to watch. And they could only hope it paid off. Alright Momo, you can rest and I'll keep watch until it's time to head down, Bakugo said, standing next to the mentioned student. I can still help, she rebuked, glaring at him. The confidence is good. The timing is bad. It's best for you to rest for now, he told her, glaring back. The two glared at each other briefly, before Momo sighed and sat down. Fine. But if I am even slightly a burden, you'll do some shit. Now, I'm gonna get this party started. You wait here, Bakugo said as he retrieved a grenade from his belt. Whilst he was tossing it, Momo shuffled over to the faux air conditioning outlet and put her ear to it. It's functioning. Strange. I doubt they would waste energy, so someone is or was in there, Momo thought as she heard a rumbling throughout it. Occasionally there was a clanging, as though something was broken, but there was also scraping followed by a silence, and then more of the clanging. Is someone moving through there? It definitely seems like it. Momo shot up and started to retrieve her book when Bakugo placed his hand on hers and gently squeezed it. Save your strength. I fucking got this, he said, taking another grenade from his belt. What about the vent filter? Momo asked, prepared to make a screwdriver. I'll just smash it with the grenade. Adds more oomph, he responded, winding his arm back to throw it hard through the metal. Momo covered her ears as the crashing sound of the metal being destroyed was heard, and the grenade went off soon after. What the? What sounded like a girl's voice echoed from within the vents, as another crashing and tumbling noise could be heard. Sounds like we got him, Bakugo said, and Momo nodded before sitting back down. Bakugo remained on guard, occasionally looking for the edge of the building to see the class taking out the other schools, with their quirks and various attacks. Whilst that was technically true temporarily, they both failed to notice the scraping and grunting noises from within. These noises sounded like claws digging into the metal, and two girls trying to work their way up. Soon both came up, one with long flowing purplish gray hair and the other with very short maroon hair. They both wore a school uniform, however the former had an addition of a monocle and a thermos of tea on her belt. The latter quickly took a swig, before closing her eyes and signaling to the one with claws. It didn't take much to understand that they wanted them to attack Bakugo whilst the boy had his back to them. She quickly approached the distracted boy whilst avoiding Yoirozu's attention as the girl with the long hair carefully approached Yoirozu from behind. Ha! Yoirozu swung around as she felt the slight breeze being redirected, only to find nothing there. I guess the wind just changed. Unfortunately for her, that was the result of the girl with long hair changing the air conditioning in order to give that, and try to wear down her opponent's nerve. Bakugo kept an ear out, but didn't turn. All according to plan, the girl with long hair thought. Unfortunately, the rest of her class was caught in the brawl on the street, but she had managed to sneak away with just one member. When they noticed UA descend upon them, she glanced around and counted only 17 of Class 1A. At the time, it stood to reason that there were either 3 incapacitated students, or 2 incapacitated and 1 guard. However, as she remembered this was the one, it stood to reason that some students had already passed. Despite this line of thought, it was apparent that one student was at the very least doing poorly, and the other was there as a guard. She racked her memory quickly, and remembered these 2, the fragile creation user and the temperamental explosive user. This should be a cinch. Keyword being should. Whilst initially she had hoped there would be all 3, as that way the pawn she brought with her could have some kind of reward, this would do fine, as it would be enough for her to pass. In any case, once she had briefly drawn the Yoirozu girl's attention away, she moved close enough to her where she could feasibly tag at least one of her points. Unfortunately, she wasn't counting on the Bakugo boy turning around so soon. "Hey Momo. Wait, who the fuck are you? And you claw fingers?" he screamed, letting off an explosion on the back of his forearm that briefly blinded the girl. Wait, why would he turn around now? No matter, just a slight variable to be shifted. The long-haired girl quickly jumped back away before Yoirozu could react. Interestingly though, Bakugo's instinct was to jump in front of Yoirozu before doing anything else. That's odd. Still, it does not change my goal, the girl thought, jumping back towards her classmate who was now recovered. Keep the blonde-haired one distracted. I will take down Yoirozu, she whispered, and her classmate nodded in understanding. Her classmate rushed forward first, being more athletic and having a more combat-oriented quirk, claws outstretched towards Bakugo's gauntlets. However, the boy caught onto this and with little hesitation, jumped high above the charging girl and passed over her, landing behind and releasing an explosion. She extended her claws significantly to form a disruption and shield her. However, Bakugo had already forgotten her and ran over to Yoirozu, who had taken up a lightweight boxing stance. Bakugo checked some gauges on the gauntlets, before exposing a tube on one, and plugging that into the other. He pressed a button and took them off, leaving his hands in just the thermal gloves. Curious, surely the more logical idea would be to use them for himself against us. I suppose the structural integrity of the building could be a concern. If it were to collapse, his ally would have no way to escape the destruction. The girl thought, as the ally skidded back over. "Miss Psycho, what now?" the other girl asked, and the one with long hair, now identified as Psycho, took another drink from her thermos. She closed her eyes briefly as possible, and only managed to do a small portion of the required calculations, but through a min-maxing method, she had hopefully singled out the most likely outcome, so long as the Bakugo boy's ego withheld, and the Yoirozu girl was as hesitant as she was during the sports festival. They couldn't have changed that much, right? Psycho did a small collection of hand signals before her classmate nodded, and rushed towards the middle of both Bakugo and Yoirozu, and as expected Yoirozu did nothing whilst Bakugo swung his left arm around to release an explosion directed at the charging girl. He decidedly did not hold back. Psycho internally flinched, but reminded herself it was for her license as she nodded again, indicating for her classmate to charge once more. This time, they went straight for Bakugo, who used a left-handed explosion to repel them once more. Interesting, he's making sure that his teammate won't be attacked. I suppose her quirk is too strong to let go to waste. That makes sense, Psycho thought as her classmate returned to her side. A beeping went off, but Psycho ignored it as she put up 2 fingers, indicating it was time for phase 2. Psycho herself went towards Bakugo, however in more of a friendly way, whilst her classmate charged towards Yoirozu. Bakugo put his left gauntlet back on and indicated for Yoirozu to take the right one, the one that had the tube plugged into it. Ah. That explains that, Psycho thought cynically, before she spoke up. Bakugo, right? Look, I don't want to fight, and I'm sure you'd like to prove your strength, yeah? Psycho started, not able to gauge his reaction beyond shock when she first started talking. So if you prove your strength against one of the most powerful students in your class, I'll let you take the elimination of my classmate, and I'll take her elimination, and we can move on. Sound good? Psycho was sure this should work. It appealed to his sense of strength, and allowed him to get ahead of the rest of his class, who were presumably still fighting if the noises were anything to go by. Of all the potential reactions, the one she anticipated least was him cackling, presumably his form of laughter. It got to the point where he was hunched over, and Psycho had to stop herself from tagging one of his targets, and completely blowing up all chances of this deal going through. "Yeah, bitch, you're going to fucking die now," he said as though it was the simplest thing, and he kicked off his shoes and propelled towards her. Psycho barely had time to duck as Bakugo maneuvered himself in mid-air to continue chasing her. Saiko quickly pulled out her costume's cane, made of steel, to defend herself, and as he flew over she braced herself, but he didn't bother stopping at her, instead charging at her classmate who was about to rake their claws across Yoyorozu's face. Yoyorozu had the gauntlet in the air, but that wouldn't hold against the sharp and fast force of the swinging claws. The most startling thing was the speed at which Bakugo had moved, which seemed to surprise even Yoyorozu. "Hey bitch, ever hear of crisis strength?" he asked, surprisingly calmly as he grabbed Saiko's classmate, who raked her claws down Bakugo's face, causing him to flinch, and yet despite that he seemed unstoppable, and proceeded to grab her collar, and throw her hard back towards Saiko with another explosion. Of course, Saiko had heard of crisis strength. It was the pre-quirk era equivalent of superpowers, primarily of mothers saving children from underneath cars or other extremely dire situations. When quirks rolled around, it was rare of the instinct to be activated, as there was typically some hero to save the day regardless. But in this case, they were the heroes. "Well, congratulations bitch," Bakugo sneered, and Saiko assumed the look on her face gave away that she understood. "You just activated mine." With that, Bakugo released 2 powerful consecutive explosions, one from each palm. The first was enough to blow the girl with the claws into the air conditioning duct and knock her out. The second one seemed to be more for show, and Saiko was surprised when, whilst she was blinded, a strong fist collided with her face. "Good one, Momo." Bakugo screamed in encouragement, and Saiko understood. Min-maxing should have worked. Should. But she often forgot to account for one thing. Human emotion. Sighing in defeat, she didn't bother picking herself off the floor as she felt her consciousness drift away, but there were a few things she heard before fainting entirely. "Cat, what were you going to ask, before we were so rudely interrupted?" Momo asked, sitting back down. "Oh yeah, you wanna go out once we're all done with this?" Bakugo asked surprisingly calmly, tying up Saiko's classmate. "I'd love to. That would explain a lot." Class 1A, after collecting the required eliminations each, were able to make their way to the lobby room, where Mineta was, quite wisely, trying to avoid them, and surprisingly successfully. Bakugo helped Yoyorozu over to the food section, where she proceeded to gorge herself, whilst Bakugo also provided judgment on various foods. He'd probably make a good anything critic, whilst Todoroki, Iida and Izuku discussed what the next section would contain. Well, this section was primarily to weed out those that didn't have enough combat potential or teamwork capabilities. Izuku spoke aloud, and Iida and Todoroki nodded in agreement. Yes, it is true that for those that have non-combat oriented quirks, they'd need sufficient teamwork to get through, Iida added. But then for those that have unreliable teammates will have a disadvantage and will be unable to achieve their license, Todoroki pointed out. Izuku and Iida looked down at this. It was an unavoidable fact of the matter. Perhaps there will be a secondary exam for students that were unable to pass today with different criteria, Iida proposed, and the other two could only hope. The boys discussed various notes they had for themselves and each other, like Todoroki needed to watch for friendly fire, Izuku needed to avoid being stuck in a concrete cube, and Iida needed to be a tad more subtle, whilst sitting on one of the benches, waiting for the rest of the examinees to finish. They were only a little over halfway through, but for now they would definitely enjoy the break. Or at least they were. The Urashi student from earlier was wandering around energetically, although Izuku couldn't help but compare it to Nejire's energy. Urashi seems to have a lot of energy, but compared to Nejire he expresses it differently. It's less curious energy and instead more excited energy. Whilst Nejire leans forward in interest whenever she actually walks, Urashi seems more content to observe and demonstrate energy towards others, instead of regarding others. However, there's one exception. It seems Izuku's gaze wandered from the black-haired student to Todoroki, currently conversing with Iida. Honestly, there was so much it could be, but Izuku had neither time nor patience to figure this out. Besides, it was probably unimportant in the scheme of things. Right now, they had to pay attention to the exam. At least, that was what Izuku was going to do before Urashi came over to him and Iida. "Oh, you two. Izuku and Iida, right?" He spoke excitedly, completely ignoring Todoroki. Hi." Izuku spoke with uncertainty whilst Iida remained in shock. "I loved your passion when you were fighting all for one," Urashi said back, beaming with an excited glint in his eyes. "And Iida, I love your family's passion for heroism, and your own passion during the sports festival," Urashi continued, causing Iida to adjust his glasses before speaking. "Yes, it is quite honorable and rewarding being able to carry the Ingenium family name into the world of heroics," Iida announced. Izuku chuckled slightly, and Todoroki also had to cover his mouth, as the two found themselves quite amused by Iida's eagerness. This however caused Urashi to still slightly, before he excused himself, bowing and leaving. The trio looked at each other and shrugged, unsure of what to make of what just happened. Soon it was announced that the final student had passed, and that anyone who had not been eliminated or passed yet were to regroup with their teachers and await further instruction from them. And then, without warning, the final stage of the exam began. As all students regained their senses, they looked around. It was a disaster. After the lobby box opened again, they were presented with a faux disaster. However, some were shocked to see actual people and children scattered. Alright. Welcome to stage 2 of your provisional license exam. A tired voice came through the speakers, the invigilator clearly having run out of steam and caffeine. How do you act in a disaster? Each of you will have one invigilator watching you, and everyone starts at a base of 100 points. We will be running off a Demer's system. Once you lose points, you cannot gain them back. If you fall below 50, you will fail. And those people you see are from the Help Us company, a group of individuals that help with exams like these. They will also be removing marks as they see fit. Go heroes, make your way, he announced, and most students dived into action. Izuku and his friends however had already started, the lack of hesitation within them showing already. Izuku with his trio ran towards the nearest building. Todoroki, use your fire to create light. Iida, prepare to clear a way back to where the medical station was set up. I've got the most raw strength and best perception, so I'll focus on finding the victims. Izuku called out to them, and the boys immediately got to work. Izuku walked forward, and as Todoroki created a small amount of fire for light, Izuku breathed in, and then out. He pushed green lightning to his head, and all his senses. His touch was heightened, hearing intense, sight sharp, smell keen, taste perfected and balance unquestionable. He felt time slow as all his processes sped up significantly. To someone outside, he became covered in a shuffling veil of the green light, as his pupils became an electrifying green, and his eyes became streaks as they followed every crack and crevice of the building. He couldn't move as fast as he could process in this state, but it allowed him to quickly analyze the situation. On his tongue there was the faint taste of ash. He could smell various combustible gases. Todoroki, no more flames. The gases are combustible. Iida, you'll need to keep your engine used to a minimum. Izuku called out, before returning to his actions. He could hear the faint breathing of several individuals. He counted 7, all within the building. It was unclear what exactly had happened, although it was clear it was some form of gas-based explosive attack. Todoroki, head to the left rubble, work your way in through the front, as that seems to be the most stable, but don't be afraid to carefully use your ice. Iida, once you're done with the path, go make your way through the right wing. It has no rubble there currently, and I suspect it will be more of a long haul. I'll go through the middle. Izuku called, and Todoroki and Iida immediately got to work. He let his body return to its natural state, and began running towards the rubble blocking the main entrance. He pressed an ear to it and listened, quirk powering it. It didn't seem like anyone was immediately behind it, but it was hard to tell the structural integrity of it, as it had completely taken over the doorway. Looking around, he noticed a window, and with clinical precision, he used his quirk to destroy a small amount of the window, before climbing in. From the inside, he was better able to analyze the structural integrity of the building. From here, he couldn't see anyone on this floor, but he could see that the structural support beams indoor were still intact. Well, I think it should be okay to remove the rubble in the door. I just need to make sure not to break anything else, Izuku thought, heading back to the main door and quickly destroying it. He ignored the very light tingling in his fingers, and made a mental note to try use his left hand next time. He focused on hearing, and heard a few stories up the cry of a child. He saw the stairs, but he also saw the elevator shaft. The elevator may be out of order, but that won't stop me from using it, he thought. It would also be faster, as it would be straight up, instead of winding. Walking into the empty shaft, he noticed that there was no elevator there, and he was able to rush straight up. Bouncing along the sides, he waited until the child's voice was the same floor. The moment it was, he came barreling out, and listened carefully. It's alright. Don't worry, I'll be there. Tell me about your injuries. Izuku called out, hoping that it would be the right move. It should help give them something to focus on whilst he could find them. My head has a gigashinai. The kid sobbed out. Izuku could hear them further back in the building, so he kept traveling. Alright, are your hands clean? Izuku asked, keeping his voice level. You are, why yeah. The child responded as more of a question than anything else. Good. That's good. Do you have a jacket? Izuku asked, getting closer to the room. Why yes mister, the child replied. Alright, can you take that off and press it to your head? So it absorbs the blood. Izuku was fairly sure he was almost there, but it was hard to tell. The building seemed to be more of a maze, probably intentionally. Alright mister. What's your name? They asked. I'm Pro Hero Midori Reiko. Izuku thought, figuring it would be a better move to not mention that he was in training, as to avoid raising doubt in their mind. Is that why your name? They asked, and Izuku could see the door that led the room they were in. Hold on a moment, make sure you're away from the door. Izuku said, before he heard a yell from them. 5 demerits for not checking on a victim's position first. Otherwise you're doing really well. The child yelled at him. He flinched, but focused on the task. Can you safely move without injuring yourself? Izuku asked, treading more carefully. Why yeah. They responded. Alright, is there anything behind the door? Izuku checked. There's a big B boulder. The child sat back, their sobs starting to increase with panic. Alright, breathe in deeply, and breathe out again. Step back from the boulder, and I want you to breathe in for 4 seconds, out for 7 and rest for 3. Keep doing that whilst I remove it, okay? Izuku spoke, making sure to try and ground the rising panic attack. He could hear their labored breathing, and gritted his teeth. He placed both his hands on the door, and began pushing green lightning through it. He felt it travel through the flimsy wood of the door, and into the boulder. He had to be very careful to not let it spread where it shouldn't, avoiding potentially breaking the building more. The moment he felt the edge of his lightning reach the tip of the boulder, he began focusing on releasing a more condensed stream, directly into the boulder. Once he was satisfied, he called out one final warning to the child inside before destroying the boulder and door. He was careful to force it to go straight to the ground as to avoid any dust floating in the air. Afterwards, he quickly walked through the door, taking off his metal ventilator and revealing his smile to the child. It's all going to be okay now, he said, cautiously approaching them as to not startle them. He handed them the ventilator and helped them put it, used some of their capture bracelet scarified him, to help properly put pressure on the wound, before putting them on his back. Come on, I'll take you out of the building and help you to the medical station, Izuku told them, running slightly towards the window. Can I keep the metal mask, mister? They asked. If it helps make you feel safe, of course. I'll be fine and you can keep it as a souvenir. Izuku responded immediately. That's cutting it very fine. It's understandable that you want to make a child feel safe, but you need to think about saving other people as well. No demers cause I actually like the mask, and if I were in actual danger, it would make me feel much safer. The child yelled at Izuku, who chuckled. Alright, I'm gonna fasten you to my back using some of this capture rope, and we'll fly you to the medical station where someone else can help patch you up while I save some other people. Izuku told them, doing as he said, before smashing the window. Hold on tight. He said as he jumped out, and with a loud crash of lightning and a flash of green, he soared across the skies. In a dozen seconds he was skidding across the ground, using his hand to stabilize himself as he landed, before untying the child off his back, and handing them off to someone who was taking count of all the civilians taken so far. In the corner of his eye he saw some of his other classmates working together to deliver people, as Bakugo was helping leading a group of the more capable victims to the designated evacuation zone, marked by a group of invigilators, away from the makeshift medical tent set up by the students. Izuku quickly gave a last smile to the child before he jumped back into the air, aiming for the window he jumped out of earlier. With perfect precision, he was able to go through the window and performed a quick roll as he redirected his momentum towards the elevator shaft. Using some of the capture rope around his wrists, he swung up towards the next floor, only slipping a few times. He listened intently, and took a few moments to establish the situation. Within his section, there was only one other person, whilst in Iida's there was one left, and Todoroki had the remaining 2, as each student had already saved 1 person each. Izuku quickly concluded that the last person for him was on the top floor, and in a critical state. Oh boy. Rushing up there using the capture rope as a grappling hook effectively, he made his way through the top exit of the elevator shaft to find no one. However, he could hear their breathing from within the rubble. Alright, if you can hear me, don't respond, tap the ground twice. He called to them, and they did so. It's going to be alright, I'm Pro Hero Midori Reiko, can you reach the ceiling from where you are? Tap twice for yes, once for no. 2 taps. Alright, I'm going to make a small hole in the ceiling there, keep tapping at the ceiling. Izuku called, dashing through the window, and after dropping for a slight moment, he used his quirk through his feet to get onto the rooftop. After listening for a moment, he found the necessary spot and yelled through for them to stop tapping and back away from the spot. They did so, and Izuku quickly created a small hole. "Alright, are you injured in any way?" Izuku called to them. "No, I'm alright, just a little out of breath," they replied. "Alright, save your voice and rest. I'll work to getting you out. I'm going to make some space in the ceiling for you to climb through, and I'll drop some rope through it for you to climb up." Izuku responded, and they nodded. They sat down against some of the rocks and rested as Izuku destroyed a small circle in the ceiling for them to drop through. He dropped the rope, and as they were climbing up, he used his quirk to access the frequency Ida, who had on Todoroki, who just had an earpiece, were connected to. "Alright guys, I've rescued the two stuck in my area and heading back to the medical station to help out. You guys good to handle your last ones?" Izuku asked, using his green lightning as a transmitter. "Yep," Todoroki responded. "I should be good, I will contact you if I need any help," Ida said as well. Izuku carried the victim back to the medical tent where they gave them some oxygen, and he began helping with evacuation efforts. That was before the concrete wall next to the medical tent blew up. Izuku, after recovering from the initial shock, quickly ran a high voltage of his quirk through the ground to where the wall was shattered and created a temporary barrier. Gritting his teeth as he kept it running, he called out, "Hurry with the evacuation efforts, or at least get the civilians out of here. I'll keep them outside for as long as I can." The other examinees were quick to respond, all using their quirks best they could in order to either help secure the perimeter or evacuate the civilians. Thankfully another examinee came along and, after Izuku briefly turned off his green lightning barrier, they filled the hole with a sticky, hardened substance. Izuku thanked them before he ran outside to fully assess the situation. It seemed to be a faux villain attack, and there were some students, he recognized them from Ketsubutsu, holding off the minor henchmen. The one named Yoshindo was using earthquakes to destroy the ground where the villains stood, however Izuku noticed it would leave him vulnerable. Running up to the boy, Izuku quickly used a discharge of his quirk to repel the quickly recovered and approaching villains. "You okay?" he asked, both hands tingling from the recent use. "Yeah, I'll be fine. Thanks for that by the way," Shindo responded. "It was nothing. Save your energy for a large attack that'll take them down for good. I'll hold them off," Izuku responded, and Shindo nodded, panting from the use of his quirk. Izuku quickly, using several separately directed strikes of his quirk, sufficiently knocked out the villains in the immediate vicinity. Then, using a larger amount of his quirk in his legs and none in his arms, he launched himself off and kicked many of the villains across the jaw, before using their falling bodies as a launch pad to launch himself at the next guy. Unfortunately, they were armed with concrete guns. Several of them were able to track him well enough to get the shots, and using a burst of his quirk from his palms similar to Bakugo's mid-air redirection, he changed targets to avoid getting hit. About a dozen seconds of this, and he had taken down around 10 of the closer dudes, when someone snuck behind the duo of boys, and shot Shindo in the back with the concrete. Responding on instinct, Izuku jumped back towards the boy, knocking out the goon responsible, and created a barrier of green lightning around both boys. It repelled the attacks and coincidentally ended up catching many of the goons in the cement. "Alright. I'm ready for the attack. It should shake the concrete off me as well, you'll just need to get us to safety," Shindo called, and Izuku prepared himself with a full body power-up. Shindo placed his hands on the ground, and small translucent domes appeared around them as he activated his quirk. The ground began rumbling, shaking, and a few moments later completely broke apart and threw all the goons in the area into complete turmoil. However, by the time the ground had settled, Izuku and Shindo were long gone, Izuku carrying the older boy by the vest of his hero costume over to the evacuation station. "You'll probably be safe here, and can help protect them. I'll head back and keep fighting," Izuku told Shindo, who nodded stiffly as the two flew through the air. When they landed, Shindo jumped up and nodded at Izuku, who waved before flying back towards where the villains seemed to originate from. He circled up above in a jagged square pattern, taking in the situation. Meanwhile, earlier down below, Todoroki was doing his best to work with Irashi. "Listen. Neither of us are strong enough to take him together, let alone together, so we should focus on holding him off whilst they focus on the evacuation efforts," Todoroki yelled at the boy who hovered slightly above the ground on a wisp of wind. "A likely story, Todoroki. You and I both know I'm stronger, the recommendation exam proved that. You're obsessed with strength and proving it, this is just another chance to prove that to you. Urashi replied. Todoroki had never wanted to physically strangle anyone more, that was a lie, but it definitely felt that way at the time, but tried his best to remain level-headed. Listen, I don't know what I did, but we have more important things right now. Todoroki yelled as he used waves of ice to protect himself from the barrage of concrete guns, whilst also catching any approaching goons. Urashi was doing something similar with his wind, using it to send the projectiles flying back. I suppose you're right, Todoroki. But I can't stand you, and you better not interfere. Urashi said before sharpening his gaze, which Todoroki did as well. But the gaze was not directed at each other. Instead, the gazes were directed towards the pro-hero rising from the sea before them. Ah, pitiful heroes. What will you do? Will you fight? Or flee? These are decisions that you will face every minute as a hero. So come, show me what you can do. The villainous-looking hero called out to them. With a glare at Todoroki, Urashi sent a powerful gust of wind to the pro before them, whilst Todoroki ignored the glare, and sent a wave of ice following it to the pro. I don't need your help, Todoroki. Urashi told him. I said early, neither of us can beat him, alone or together. Trust me, I know what it means to need help when you don't think you do. It's hard, but we need to work together if we want to slow him best. Todoroki said almost instantly. The result was a gust of chilled wind with a devastating wave of ice behind it, rushing towards the pro-hero, that flicked their cape in response. Much to their horror, he braced himself, and unleashed a powerful shockwave attack that disrupted the cold air and dispersed it, whilst also destroying the ice. Somehow, by the time it reached the boys, it was still enough to rattle them, but had spread out far enough to free the henchmen flanking the two students from their various captured states. Both Todoroki and Urashi were forced backwards, digging their heels in as they tried to recover from the shock of the supersonic attack. It rattled them in multiple ways, however most devastatingly for them was the fact that it was incredibly disorienting. Neither boy had any kind of defense against an attack of such a kind, and both of them would take notes to do something about that. However, the goons seemed to have built-in nullifiers to protect against such recoil. This left both of them vulnerable to a barrage of attacks, both getting hit once before Todoroki created a dome of ice to protect the two students. Alright Urashi, listen to me. I don't know what I did to you. I don't know why you hate me so much, but we don't have time to argue. Listen to me carefully, Todoroki said sharply, not giving the other boy a chance to cut in. I'm going to turn this ice dome to mist. We can use that as cover to try and get away and reposition. Ready? Ready? Urashi replied, hardened, and Todoroki ignited the fire half of his quirk. The blaze quickly turned the ice to water, and immediately turned it to mist, whilst Urashi used a small shield of air to protect himself from the heat. Gangwarka, being quiet, was incredibly excited to be able to help train the unexamined heroes of the future. Best of all, he got to work with the kids. But he did have to fight them. Maybe he'd get to talk to them later. He could hear some students arguing, although being honest, it was hard to distinguish who it was through the water, but it sounded like one student was being particularly uncooperative. No matter. I will make note of who was trying to cooperate and make sure they are given some points back for this, Gangwarka thought, as he began rising through the water. To be honest, to get into this role, Gangwarka had spent a lot of time watching old movies. He particularly liked the methods used by villains from the pre-quirk era movies, and hey, if he used it as inspiration for intimidation tactics to use against villains, that was just a bonus. So as he rose from the water, he deepened his voice and began his monologue that he had prepared earlier. With a flick of his cape, he stared down the students that were bickering before. He instantly recognized Endeavor's son, and wouldn't be too surprised if he was the one to start the argument. So as he listened to the words of the boys, he was shocked to find that Todoroki was in fact trying to get the other boy to cooperate better. But that wasn't his concern right now. With a flick of his cape, he braced himself for the recoil of his own attack, releasing a relatively weak sonic attack to destroy the approaching attack of wind and ice, whilst also being able to disorient the boys and free any of the goons. Gangwarka had no idea how the Hero Commission got enough physically capable people for such a test, but it was impressive in its own way, that had become entrapped in various fixtures, such as ice and concrete. Maybe the goons weren't quite as capable as he thought. Regardless, they still attacked the now disoriented boys as soon as they were freed, and a few were able to land hits before Todoroki built an ice dome. From outside, and thanks to his quirk, Gangwarka could hear the conversation the two boys were having. It's definitely a nice change seeing someone connected to Endeavor doing the cooperative talk, although it makes me wonder their history. No matter, Gangwarka finished his train of thought as he saw the mist beginning to form. Boss. We can't see the brats. One of the goons called out. Activate your infrared. There should be a switch on the side of your helmets. Gang worker responded, remembering the notes he got earlier on. Still nothing, boss. They've disappeared. Another responded. Clever, presumably using a small torrent of cold wind around the two of them, and the mist itself would be quite warm, enough so to hide their body temperatures. The pro hero reasoned, but it definitely didn't make up for the Urashi boys' insolence earlier. Clever, but it won't hide from me. Gang worker roared, before using his echolocation to pin down the boys' locations. It didn't take long before he was able to pin them down, and he cackled as evilly as possible. Foolish heroes. You thought you could hide from me. He monologued at them, before launching a powerful sonar attack at them. What he wasn't expecting was to hear the sound of ice shattering. It rapidly cleared the fog, and he could see the remnants of an ice sculpture and sections of a massive ice wall that was built. With echolocation I can't distinguish heat signatures, and I wasn't focusing on the distance change, just the structure. Clever, using my tunnel vision against me, he congratulated the two, but now was not the time for that. Clever heroes, but that won't be enough. The ice barrier you have before you is nothing compared to my strength, he declared, before firing off a much larger sonic attack. He had to resist the urge to flinch at the strength of the noise produced, but focused on paying attention to finding the students. It completely shattered the ice, however the ice protected the students from the noise. It also meant that Gang Orca had the slight disadvantage, as he would need to find the students, whilst the students would already know his location from the attack. It was a very good plan from being uncooperative at the beginning, and maybe if these two were lucky enough, they would both pass, instead of what was seemingly going to be just Todoroki. However, what Gang Orca wasn't expecting would be a tornado of flames. The two boys, side by side and one arm raised each, used their quirks in perfect tandem, Todoroki producing large torrents of fire, and Urashi producing a powerful gust of wind. Fire produces the strength that wind would lack, and wind produces speed and control. These two are prepared, smart, Gang Orca thought, crossing his arms in a brace. However, he was taken off guard when it flew to his left, and the attack instead began circling him, speeding up and producing a large torrent of flames. Of course, it's well known that as a hero with a sea creature quirk, I'm prone to drying out. Flames and wind are the most effective at that. Gang Orca smirked, but he held strong. It would take more than this to do so. However, they were consistent. Gang Orca's smirk gritted into a tight-lipped smile as the fire tornado around him grew stronger. Luckily for him, the goons were shooting concrete at the boys, which was siphoned into the tornado. The wet cement, whilst it dried, made it slow down, and ended up suffocating the fire. And whilst the boys had tunnel vision on the pro hero, they forgot that the goons could attack them still. So both boys were hit in the back by large clumps of fast-drying concrete, weighing them down, and making it impossible for them to escape. You boys were good. Any regular villain would be begging for mercy at this point, and would have neither the numbers or firepower to keep going. But what if they didn't? What if they stood above your final attack, your combination, and said, "Show me, heroes, what comes next?" Gang Orca lectured as he crushed two recycled plastic bottles in his hands to drip the water contained within all across him. He had his own recycled bottle plant. It made life much easier for him and many other pro heroes with similar restrictions, as he sold in bulk direct to them. We have. Todoroki thought bleakly. Nothing in us finished, and the two remained trapped in the concrete. At least, that was until Todoroki heard a familiar crashing. From the corner of his eye, he could see bright green streaks through the sky, just above Gang Orca's position in a square pattern. It was pretty if he was being honest. But neither of them had time to stare as Gang Orca suddenly started clutching his head tight. Todoroki and Inasa couldn't hear anything, but it was clear the pro hero could. He ended up raising his face to where Izuku was, and firing a supersonic shot that was far stronger and faster than anything he had seen before, and it was confirmed when Gang Orca announced the move name. Supersonic Wave. Maximum power. Feeling a pang of terror at the move so fast he couldn't properly track it, Todoroki gritted his teeth, but couldn't bear to tear his eyes away from the scene. So he couldn't describe the relief or shock he felt when Izuku created a barrier, albeit very last name and very shoddy, but it dispersed the attack and protected him. Izuku then took advantage of the pro's own recoil from using the move, and the recoil he was suffering from the sound attack earlier, to dive bomb towards them, and moving faster than any of the goons could track, or the guns could fire or the projectiles could travel. He cocked back a fist, and once close enough rammed it straight into Gang Orca's stomach. Anguarka doubled over at the extreme impact, despite being able to catch it with his left hand. Young hero. You are strong. But where'd he go? Izuku had, taking advantage of Anguarka being doubled over, and the goons all watching in shock, use a burst of green lightning from his feet to propel himself back over to where the other boys were, and place a hand on each of the concrete blocks that held them in place. He sent a low amount of lightning through each, breaking the cement enough in order to free the two boys. By this time, Anguarka was ready however, and launched himself off the ground towards the now free trio, a fist reared back and ready to knock down at least one of them, with a barrage of cement launching at the boys as well. Izuku, after a moment, used a large quantity of his quirk originating from his torso, to create a large repulsive dome, which successfully sent all of the projectiles back to sender. Urashi, Todoroki, I need him stalled for 5 seconds. He called out, and before Anguarka could land a punch on any of the boys, a massive wall of ice appeared along with a chilling wind around it. Instinctively he jumped back, the cold wind could dry him out easily, and prepared to destroy it. He braced himself, but heard something and decided to wait. There was a whirring noise, and the boy using the lightning called out, railgun shot. Destruction. And so the ice wall was broken for him. He was wondering why, but when he saw the boy again with another projectile ready to go and the whirring lightning around the metal gauntlets, he understood. Railgun shot. High impact, low penetration. All Anguarka could do was brace. Izuku was yet to try this shot on a biological target, but as long as he prioritized the impact of the shot itself, it shouldn't do any major damage against a target he definitely didn't want it to. However, he didn't need to find out as he heard a loud buzzer. The last civilians have made it to the evacuation zone and are in safety. Please make your way to the starting area for your results and further instructions. And then I can get some sleep. A voice called out, and Izuku recognized it as the primary exam invigilator. Anguarka also let out a breath he was holding, and went up to congratulate the boys. Todoroki and Urashi, I believe. You two did very well to patch up your differences and work together. That is very important in the line of work. And whilst your initial fire tornado definitely would have worked against any other villain, it's important to have a follow-up. Always. Anguarka then turned to Izuku, who was pressing various buttons on his left-hand gauntlet. And Izuku, correct? Anguarka asked. Yes, sir. Izuku responded as he stiffened up, causing the pro hero to chuckle. Don't worry about the formalities, young man. You did incredibly well, not only against me, but you prioritized the rescue of your teammates. I am very glad the exam finished when it did, because otherwise I would have been feeling the bruise from your railgun shot for weeks to come. Congratulations to all three of you, he said, giving them a thumbs up before going to help the hired goons out of the concrete they were trapped in. Izuku finished punching in the buttons on his left gauntlet to reveal a rolled-up notebook. Well, while we're walking, do you mind if I ask you some questions about your quirk, Urashi? Izuku asked the taller boy. Not at all. I love your passion for quirks, he loudly announced, and Todoroki followed behind the two, chuckling. By the time they arrived at the announcement podium, Izuku had filled a page regarding Urashi's quirk, and the two were excitedly discussing the best up-and-coming pro heroes, and Todoroki would intermittently offer his opinion, although he wasn't quite as well versed in the subject. Izuku was very glad to see the two interacting without any animosity, and it was quite relieving when the two held a standard conversation together, standard as in they were both insulting Endeavor as much as possible, but that's pretty good. Soon the invigilator stood behind the lectern, and a tense silence fell over all the students present. Alright. You were marked on a Demers system, because there's no room for errors in the line of heroism. Negative publicity catches on far more in most instances. And errors can be especially fatal. On the board behind me, we'll display the names of everyone that passed in alphabetical order by first name. Other invigilators will hand out the individual breakdown. And I'm going to go sleep, Mara finished, before pressing a button which caused the screen to flicker to life. All the students remained silent for a good few seconds, all of them searching for their name on the screen. They all remained silent, until Urashi broke it. I passed, he screamed, throwing his fists in the air. The students all began celebrating their own with their friends. Todoroki, Izuku and Iida joined Urashi in their celebration, even if Todoroki's was more of just a placing his fist in the air. Congratulations Izuku, Todoroki and Urashi. I expected no less of such exemplary students, Iida said, his hand karate chopping the air. Don't sell yourself short, Iida. I'm sure you did really well too. And you are no less exemplary than any of us, Izuku told him with a smile on his face, and Todoroki provided a hum in agreement. Wait, Ida, as in the Ingenium family. Urashi spoke up, I love you guys. So much passion. Thank you. I hope to continue to wear the Ingenium name with pride and carry on where my brother left off. Iida said, and Todoroki and Izuku were glad to see that he had carried on. From somewhere to the left, he heard a pained wail that belonged to a certain Grapus. The group of boys turned and walked over, even though they kept a good 2 meters, much like the rest of one it did, from the boy, when they went to see what was wrong. Urashi looked at them in confusion and Todoroki whispered to him a few of the things he had done so far, and Urashi instantly scowled, and Todoroki held his arm out to indicate that physically assaulting him now was a bad idea. What happened here? Izuku asked Bakugo, who scoffed before responding. Little shit failed. We don't know why yet, but I don't imagine it was anything good. Thankfully, none of them would have to wait long, and within their own groups, they shared their scores. I got 85, it says mostly from the time I spent explaining my actions. So I guess it's better to just act and explain while acting rather than doing one or the other. I suppose as pros we're given the authority and respect to just be able to tell people what to do, Izuku thought aloud, before Todoroki shared his. I got 70. Spent too much time waiting for others and not being able to figure things out for myself, mostly with the fire at the beginning. Todoroki shared, and Izuku nodded in understanding before Iida shared his. I got 59, Urashi announced, before bowing at the waist to Todoroki, for causing a conflict with you. I apologize, and hope we can become friends. Todoroki blinked, and patted the taller boy's shoulder. Sure, he said plainly, pulling out his phone and handing it to the boy. Here. Put your number in, we can stay in touch. I would very much like that. Urashi announced excitedly, snatching Todoroki's phone from his outstretched hand, and enthusiastically punched his number in. Iida and Izuku shrugged, but they caught a glimpse of Aizawa-sensei approaching them. They nervously gulped, but realized his eyes were locked dead onto Mineta. All students in the immediate vicinity noticed Aizawa-sensei's dead-eye glare, and immediately hushed, waiting to see what would happen. The man in question walked up to a quivering and upset Mineta, and snatched the feedback form from his hands. 0. How did you get 0? Aizawa-sensei asked, but even Kaminari knew better than to respond to that question. I don't know, sensei. Mineta whined. Yes you do, was Aizawa-sensei's response, and everyone could see the man getting gradually more furious, even if it was subtle. The slight gripping of his hand tightening on the paper, his feet shuffling. Mineta. You should consider yourself very, very lucky that not only am I only expelling you, but that people do not press charges. We will bring you back to UA, but from the moment we arrive, you are hereby expelled. We will allow you to stay the night and pack your things, but tomorrow you will need to leave. Get on the bus. Now. Aizawa-sensei told him sternly, before the following the wailing former student to the bus. The rest of one is to wait for further instructions. Get changed and join us on the bus, he casually announced to everyone else as he walked away. A moment's silence passed. And then cheers echoed from most of the members of 1A. Mina was the first to cheer, followed by a ribbon of victory from Asui, and then the rest of the students followed with their own cheers. The only students to not have form of victory celebration was Todoroki, who no one would hold it against him for, but if they looked closely, they could see a glint of happiness in his eyes. Tokoyami, who had dark shadows celebrating for him and gave an appreciative grunt, and Kaminari, who would miss his best friend but would be fine without. Alright. Can I get everyone's attention? The invigilator drawled, and everyone silenced quickly, and looked at him. Good job to everyone here today. If you failed the first portion, then there will be chances later in the year for you to try and achieve your provisional license. If you failed the second portion with a minimum score of 1, he snarled that part slightly, but the 1 students understood, you will be able to attend additional sessions here. With the combination of All Might's retirement and the disbanding of the League of Villains, it's a very volatile time in Hero Society, as we struggle to make sure the power void left by the League isn't filled, and that All Might's power void is not filled by a single person, but many. The coalition of the strong, to protect the weak. And you will be that coalition. A group of new heroes being trained not to be a single pillar, but thousands in a generation to combine into one. He announced to them, and all the students began pondering. It was a vast idea for them to think about. But they had to think about it sooner or later. Soon one was all back on the bus, and were talking whilst Mineta was being kept up the front, on the seats across from Aizawa-sensei, who was sleeping. Izuku had sent Nejire an image of his provisional license, which had a headshot of him in his hero costume smiling, and Nejire sent a lot of images in response. She liked images. A lot. It made conversations more Interesting. The two texted for a while whilst Izuku rode the bus back to school, a quiet lull falling over the students as some began nodding off. He also made sure to snap a photo of Bakugo sleeping on Yoirozu's shoulder, who was sleeping on the blonde's head. He sent it to both his mother and Nejire. His mother sent a text of cackling, whilst Nejire cooed at the display. We should do that. That'd be so much fun. Nejire-chan. Yeah, it would be. Midori Reiko. Once they were finally back at school, and the bus was parked with the others, and no one dared wake the couple so they were in the bus, the students unpacked their cases and began returning to class. They were almost at the dorms when from the left they heard Izuku. "Ah, you're back." And saw a blur of blue rush towards the mentioned boy. The two became a blur of blue and green, as one struggled to hug the other tighter, and the other struggled to land. Somehow, they landed on their feet, although they were several meters off of the path where Izuku once stood in the middle, and unscathed, miraculously. Most of the girls cooed, the boys chuckled, and Mineta whined loudly, which went ignored by most people, although Izuku made a mental note to keep an eye on him. "Hey Nejire," he said, nervously hugging her back, surprised by the display of affection. "Hey yourself," she giggled in response, before her eyes took on a familiar glint of curiosity. "Hey, did you see any interesting quirks? What was the exam like? Did you hurt yourself? Are you tired? Do you need me to carry you back? Was it anything like ours? We had to fight Gang Orca and do a rescue, but there wasn't anything else. Maybe it changed with All Might's retirement. Oh, and we did it at the same place as, at the time, 1B, because there weren't any actively competitive parts. Did you? Did you have to actively fight anyone? Did?" Nejire was cut off by Izuku tapping her gently on the nose. Everyone watched in silence at the sudden move, and Nejire took a moment to process. And then she started blushing. She hit her face against Izuku's chest, and everyone began cooing, and Mineta screamed bloody murder until Tsu slapped him hard. There was a very, very red mark on his cheek. "Come to our dorms and I'll answer the questions on the way," Izuku told Nejire, and the two began walking hand in hand back to the dorms. Bringing up the back of the class were bleary-eyed Bakugo and Yoirozu, who didn't realize they were still holding hands as Bakugo yelled at everyone to keep moving. Meanwhile, Izuku was summarizing his time based on her questions. "First, no, I don't need to be carried, I'm just tired, and the most injuries I have are a slight burn on some of my hands and feet. That reminds me, I need to update my costume, let me make a quick note," Izuku said, getting sidetracked. Nejire simply smiled, and whilst he was writing on a note to stick on his case, she noted it was directed to Ame Hatsune. "Oh, that girl. Isn't she the one Power Loader is always complaining about? Apparently she's a prolific inventor. Oh wait, she did the advertisement thing in the sports festival. She seems neat. Anyway, it makes sense that Izuku and her are friends. Hey, maybe she'll do my gear as well. I could use some more stuff." By the time Nejire finished her train of thought, Izuku had finished his note and was smiling at her. She smiled back and walked in front of him, scooping him up and putting him on her back. "If your feet hurt, I'll carry you back. If you don't want treatment because it's minor, then at least let me help," she told him before he could decline. She smiled when he hummed in agreement. "Alright, tell me, what happened?" "Well," Nejire whined, and Izuku dived into his answers and explanations. It honestly warmed her heart that he was able to answer all the questions she had earlier, and would take the time to go into extra details regarding his quirk theories and things, and the two, even after arriving back at the dorms, sat down on one of the couch and, after Izuku ran upstairs briefly to grab his laptop, the two did some further research to try and find footage of various students that interested them, and similar quirks. Their half-date was briefly paused when Izuku went to the kitchen to get some water. Nejire was looking through one of his coveted notebooks. If a bit old, it was so old it was done in crayon, but had surprisingly good sketches, but very rudimentary notes. It was adorable, like, so cute, when she noticed a gaze on her. She discreetly looked to where it was coming from. "Ah, Mineta. The once one a pervert. I do not like the way he is looking at me," she thought. She pretended not to notice as he got up and walked in front of her, where she was holding the notebook up. "Hey, I saw the images in there, not great. If you follow me to my room, I'll draw you like one of my French girls," Mineta said with a suggestive wink and wiggle of his eyebrows. Nejire almost always smiled. Sleeping. Smiling. Kissing Izuku. Smiling. Working. Smiling. Homework. Smiling. Exercise. Smiling. But right now, her smile was very, very different. It was more of a faux smile, a little too sweet, one you would give to someone before completely crushing them, physically or metaphorically. No, she said, over-enunciating the words with a sickly sweet tone of voice. Apparently Mineta didn't get that. Oh come on, don't you want some before I leave? Cause I'd love some of you, he said, trying to be subtle as he reached for her chest. However, Nejire knew this. She wasn't as airheaded as some people thought she was. So she decided the best course of action at the attempted perversion was to raise her left leg as fast as possible, without a quirk, and slam it right into Mineta's jewels. And as a third-year pro hero who needed the leg strength to be able to use that as a basis to fly, it was very, very strong. Nejire quickly got up and left to the kitchen, not before taking the notebook and Izuku's laptop. Mineta remained frozen there, in complete shock at the extreme pain. Ha! See, told you the nerd's girlfriend had it under control. She's a part of the big three for fuck's sake. What even went through the shit's head? Bakugo cackled as Yoirozu watched sitting next to him, with a metal bat in hand. I suppose that's a good point. Well then, tea? No? Give him the hard stuff, some fucking coffee. I'd fucking love some of your tea, Momo. That's what I thought. Meanwhile, Nejire had, after waiting for Izuku to finish drinking the water, ambushed him and dragged him up to his room. She gently laid the notebook on the desk, and the two sat on his bed, side by side, going through some old hero clips on the laptop. It was a happy ending to their half-date. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious.